Hey there, welcome back to my sewing room. This is Lori. This week I have, since Halloween is almost upon us, I've made a quick table runner because I had a table runner for, for fall and one for, late summer, but I didn't really have anything for Halloween, and so I wanted to make something quick. So let me show you what I did. So the quickest way that I know to do something decorative when it comes to quilting is to do an applique. So I did a Google search for some images that I could use as a template to trace around for my applique. And I found that if I added the words black line image to whatever search term I used, then I got this kind of picture rather than like a photograph. So I did witch's hat, jack-o'-lantern, black cat. I did gravestone and bat. And for each of those, I put in a black line image at the end. Then when the picture came up like it does here, I just did a right click and copied and pasted this into a Google document. By doing that, it allows you to adjust the size, and as long as it's not bigger than an 8.5 by 11 sheet of copy paper, you're fine. Although with the witch's hat, I actually did make it a little bit bigger because I figured I can figure out the point and the little edge of the brim if it goes beyond that. And it actually did. So I copied it into the Google document, and I had to change the margins of my paper to the very minimum so that it could take up as much paper as possible. Then I printed it out on my printer, and I used that to trace around when I used my fusible interfacing. I also found that for the witch's hat, it worked better if I set my page at landscape, and then for some of the other images, I went ahead and did them at portrait. So you might want to play with that a bit to see what works best for the image you choose. Once I had my images selected, I used a fusible webbing. In this case, I used Wonder Under. In the past, I've used Heat and Bond, and it works just fine. I laid the fusible webbing down so that it would, in this case, the image doesn't really matter because you can do it front and back. But if you want it to face a certain direction, you have to remember to trace it so that it'll be facing the right way. The bumpy side is the adhesive side. In this case, I'm tracing it onto the paper side. So once I have all the different features traced, then I do a rough cut and then iron them onto my fabric. Now, one thing that you have to make sure of is that you iron it to the wrong side of your fabric. I made that mistake in one case and put it on the front side, and so then I had to find different fabric to use. Here I'm just pulling some scrap fabric out of my leftover charm squares to use for the smaller pieces of the applique. So I laid out my fabric, and remember, you need to put your fabric the nice side facing down because you're ironing your fusible webbing to the back side. You can see here's where I made my mistake. I'm putting that fusible on top on the front side of the yellow, which ended up being a mistake. So once I've got it done, then I trace it, cut it out, score the back with a pin so that it peels nicely, and then ironed it down onto my fabric. So fortunately, I had a piece of batting left over from a quilt that was just barely the right size for this table runner. But that meant I didn't have any little extra wiggle room on the edges, so I had to be very careful to lay my fabric out on top so that it lined up perfectly. I couldn't, just throw it on there and not worry about the edges. But I managed to use it, and it worked out just fine. A lot of times when I do a large quilt, I will use a spray-based. For this project, I decided just to use my quilter's pins, the safety pins. And for this, that it worked fine. I figured since I've already got the adhesive of the Wonder Under, I did notice that as I was stitching on it, that some of the adhesive does get onto your needle as you're stitching. So I didn't really want to add more adhesive by using a spray base for this project. And since it's small, it worked just fine for me. For the quilting part, I did change out my needle to a quilting needle, so since it's going through a lot of layers. And I used my stitch regulator, the BSR, so that I wouldn't have to turn it around a whole lot for the quilting part of it. That just made it go a little bit faster. Yeah, those are my quilting needles. A lot of times when I'm quilting a larger project, I do use my gloves because it gives me a lot more grip when I'm trying to move a larger piece around underneath the needle. And I started off with the gloves on this project, and then after a while decided I didn't need them. And so then I took them off. But I also used my Supreme slider. I find that helps me to, if I'm going to make any kind of a small movement, it makes it go a little bit easier. So then I just trimmed it down. And I had enough of the black fabric. I had almost enough of the black fabric to make the binding. I did have to add a little bit of black from my stash, but it didn't really matter. So yeah, so I cut my binding. This time I did straight line cuts. Sometimes I'll do it on the bias, but this case I didn't. And I cut it at 2.5 inches wide and folded in half, the normal binding method. and then stitched it on. All right, so here is the final product. And so since the background fabric is a newspaper print, I didn't want to quilt it in such a way that it covered that up. So what I did for my quilting lines is I just quilted the lines in between the little advertisements in the the fake newspaper type print. I thought it was really cute. For some of them, like the spider, when I chose to do a spider, I don't think I really thought it through, because for applique purposes to, stitch along the outer edge would take forever. So what I ended up doing was really for the legs, just sewing down the middle. Let me see if I can get very close. And I ended up doing a zigzag, a really tight zigzag along each leg. And I'm thinking that as it gets washed, that this will kind of fray a little bit, and that'll give it a kind of a fuzzy look, which is okay with me. With the bats, I did the dense zigzag on the outer edge, and then when I quilted it, I used the quilting lines to outline the body and the lines of the wing. Now the pumpkin gave me a little bit of trouble with the mouth because of zigzagging around those little teeth and everything, and I ended up going over it twice to make it look more dense, because with the yellow fabric, the zigzag didn't look as dense as with the dark fabric. Now with this cat here, I did a straight line applique so that when it's washed, the outer edges will fray, and that will give it that fuzzy look, which, I think will look fine. Now with the hat, I did do a really dense zigzag around the outer edge, and then use the quilting to add in those wrinkle lines that I thought would give the hat a little bit of interest. Now with the first black cat that I did do the zigzag on the outer edge of the cat, and I found that it was really tedious to do all those little curves in the zigzag. So that's why when I did the second cat, I chose to do the straight line, because that was too much. So overall, I'm really happy with how it turned out. I'm sorry, I'm trying to show you the whole project in one view here. But if I show you from the end, you can get a better look at the whole thing. And it's long enough that it just barely drapes over the edge of my table. All right, so that's it. I hope that you'll find some good ideas in this this latest table runner that I made. And if you liked what you saw, please make sure you give me a thumbs up and even subscribe. Thank you.